What is happening with Roquan Smith? What was that tweet about? And is somebody walking around the NFL saying, "Do you want to trade for Roquan?" And they're not an agent of Roquan's?
So here's the situation, Rich. And I talked to people within the league and with clubs who said they don't ever remember a memo like this ever coming from the league. There's a specific person who has been in the orbit of NFL players for some time and has assisted in a variety of different contracts that have been done around the NFL, which, again, there's different ways to look at the letter of the law here, but the NFLPA certifies agents. You have to go through a process. You have to pass a test. This person is not a certified agent, and they were calling around to clubs saying, I represent Roquan Smith. We're trying to get a deal done. We're trying to get a trade and a contract extension. Well, not only did clubs hear that, but agents got wind of it, and some agents informed the union what was going on. So the union talked to the management council and had them send that memo saying if it's a not certified agent, you're not allowed to talk to them, period. Like, that's just against the way that business works in the NFL. But the really interesting part then about the memo was the fact that this was once again a warning shot fired by the NFL about tampering. We know that they came down hard on the Dolphins because of tampering with Tom Brady and Sean Payton. But in the course of that same memo about this specific person, it also pointed out you need to have direct written permission to discuss trades with a player or his agent. In other words, it's not good enough for the agent to tell you, hey, I've got permission, or to get a phone call from the club. No, they specifically need to write the permission, which is, again, something the competition committee has pushed here, which is this is a corrosive thing, as they put it in the memo, to the game, just tampering that goes on, even though we all know that there are certain areas, particularly around free agency, where there's, various levels of contact that may or may not be within the letter or the spirit of the rules. But the league is really making this a point of emphasis here, and it's a clear message that, Roquan Smith or anyone else, as you're trying to get deals done, you need to make sure that you have actual permission from the club, because if you don't, then you're potentially facing serious consequences.
Well, so, Roquan Smith's got to know that. So So is there somebody like his friend or colleague or somebody with a legal background that knows him, just, calling people up and saying, do you have Les Snead's number? Or just throwing out a name, obviously, but just and just calling teams up, and that word got out and it filtered up to 345 Park Avenue, and they fired off a warning. Is that
correct? That is exactly it. And this is somebody, again, who's and the person was identified in the memo. It's somebody who's been involved with a handful of other high-profile player contracts through the years. So this was a known thing that had been going on. The unique part of this is it's a trade, and so teams were getting the calls from someone saying, "Yeah, I'm Roquan's agent," and then the teams are, "Well, I didn't think Roquan had an agent. Right. What are you trying to do? Do you have permission to call me?" No. Okay, well then, what's your plan here? It's a very different
that's wild
type of situation. And quite frankly, Roquan's not in a position where he has a great deal of leverage because he's under contract for this season. He can be tagged a couple of times by the Bears as well. And at some point, and I would anticipate, Rich, we're coming up on this maybe as soon as next week, that either they're going to get a deal done or the Bears are going to say, okay, enough of the hold in. You're now going to get on the practice field and you're going to play for us this season. Because as much as these hold-ins have become commonplace and teams kind of largely go along with them, you're not technically allowed to do that. Withholding your services also violates the CBA, so they can start fining him at any time. My understanding is they've not done that yet, but that's kind of the next step if he doesn't practice. But for Roquan also, again, because of his relative lack of leverage here, when they say, hey, it's time to practice and play, his best move may just be to go ahead and practice and play before you get into an entire other fight, knowing that ultimately you can't force their hands if trading you is not something they want to do.
This is one of the best players in the game too, Tom, certainly at his position. And you just were at Bears camp. Based on what I saw last week, the team is saying whenever it's brought up about what Roquan's thinking, well, you got to ask him. And then he's not available to be asked questions of, because the Bears policy is if you don't practice, you're not made available to the media. And so nobody can actually go up to the guy. And it's a wild situation. What was it like being around it?
Well, from what I saw, I mean, I was there for 2 hours. I never saw Roquan, and I was watching the rehab group the entire time. He's generally, from what I understand, he's kind of come out there during practice and been, standing around. He was at the preseason game. I think we saw that on TV the other day too. In terms of the Bears, they're just kind of moving forward here. They're trying to get new schemes up and running, a new culture up and running with Matt Eberflus there and the GM Ryan Poles. That defense still. At least in the one practice I saw, and it's always dangerous, Rich, to draw conclusions when you're there for one day because you don't know what the emphasis is and what it's looked like the rest of the time. But the defense was living in the backfield. That offensive line they're still sorting that out, how they're going to protect Justin Fields. The receiver group right now, I mean, they've got a couple of guys who are not on the field because of injuries. Pringle's been out and Bayless Jones has been out, but they were running yesterday. Besides Darnell Mooney, their first team receivers were Equinemius St. Brown and Nasimba Webster. So you're not throwing to, no offense to either of those guys, but you're not throwing to all pros out there. So it was a battle for him. But Justin was still on the field a good 20, 30 minutes after practice while I was talking to some folks out there, going through extra reps, throwing the ball to Mooney. There's a lot to learn with Luke Getsy's offense. It's just, you just wonder as you move forward here, does he have enough kind of, firepower around him to draw a true evaluation off Justin Fields in 2022?